Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today's conversation about AI literacy, educator preparation, and also some classroom practice. My name is Sabrina Baptiste, and I lead the Pathways Alliance here at Innovate EDU. The Pathways Alliance is and works with organizations across the country to strengthen pathways into the teaching profession. Before we begin, I do want to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's session will be recorded and we'll share the recording and related resources after the webinar. Please submit your questions through the Q&A throughout the session. We will address as many as possible near the end. As you already know, or if you can think about it or guess, AI is already changing how educators plan lessons, create materials, provide feedback, and also manage their workload. Future teachers will enter classrooms where there are tools present, but we also hear this question on whether preparation programs feel ready for this shift or not. At the Pathways Alliance, we truly believe preparation must begin before the teachers enter the classroom. Candidates need opportunities to learn about AI through their coursework, field experience, coaching, and also the work experience with educators. Today's conversation is not about the newest or latest AI tools. It is about how educators can decide when AI is useful, when it is not, and also which decisions must remain with the teacher. I'm pleased to be joined by Jennifer Purat, founder and CEO of Craft Ed Curriculum. Jennifer has spent more than 2 decades working in a project-based learning and also recently returned to the classroom herself. That gave her the opportunity to experience AI not only as a researcher or a consultant, but as a classroom teacher trying to plan strong instruction and also manage the daily demands of teaching. Jennifer, thank you for joining us today in this wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about all things AI and PBL.
Great. Jennifer, let's begin with your own experience. You have shared that AI has made teaching possible in ways that you have not expected. What was happening in your classroom and how did using AI change your thinking?
Yeah, so when I had this lovely gift of returning to the classroom last fall, and it was partnered with the position was also I was the head of a department and also building a diploma program. So I had a lot on my plate, and of course there was no curriculum for the 2 classes that I was teaching. So I was pretty maxed out. I mean, I had definitely hit my ceiling. A lot of mornings, up at 4 a.m. trying to get my work done. And for me, what was always most important was showing up for the kids. So my pedagogy, my curriculum, that was always what was most important. So I really turned to AI out of complete desperation. I was like, I can't actually manage my workload. And so it was pretty messy at first. It really didn't go well. And I think that's probably because I didn't have any training. I was just kind of learning on the fly. And I jumped to it with my students before I was ready to do that. So I actually kind of had to take a step back and just say, okay, we're going to actually put the iPads down and we're going to go back to pen and paper. And so I had them use project folders. And I figured out that AI could be my partner first before I brought it to my students. So I started using it to create, worksheets for my projects. So scaffolding activities, reflective activities, all the things that I knew were best practices of project-based learning, but I didn't have the time to create while I was trying to do these other things in this role. And so for me, it really became AI became my partner. It became somebody that I checked in with daily on the progress of the project that we had built together and what the outcome was. But it really became my co-planning partner in the process.
Thank you for that. And I would love to hear a little bit more about was there a specific moment when you realized, okay, AI could really be meaningful to support some of the challenges that I'm trying to solve? And like, I know you just mentioned a few, but what were some of like the really big challenges that you were trying to solve that you thought to yourself, okay, this could be very useful?
The biggest one was assessment. So, designing rubrics it's so hard to do. It's time consuming, but also there's people with PhDs in assessment that create valid tools. Like it's a hard thing to do. And so it became so time consuming, but I wasn't willing to let go of it because I knew how important it was to project-based learning. So for me, the huge time saver initially was building these rubrics together that were so much better than what I was trying to do on my own. But then the most critical piece was I would ask it, I'd feed the rubric back in and I would say, okay, what are some reflective activities I can do with students to provide them feedback? And what I was finding was because I had all of this stuff already done, I had, co-planned already with AI, it freed me up during the class to really be able to sit down with my students and give them feedback for the first time. So it was like I had these activities, I had the tools, and now I had the time for me to sit down and say, okay, here's how you feel like you're doing on your collaboration. Here's what I'm observing. Here's some concrete things from the rubric that I think you should work on, and let's see it in this next stage of the project. And then I'll give you feedback in terms of a grade at the end when I've given you the opportunity to improve with my feedback. And so that was something that was always more theoretical that I just never was able to pull off because it was so time consuming in the past.
Thank you for that. And as we know, people always focus or often focus on AI tools because there's so many of them. And there's always a newer or more faster one. But at Pathways, we really have been focused on AI literacy because we do deem that very important. What does AI literacy mean to you, and how is it different from simply knowing how to use an AI tool?
It's a great question. And I appreciate that you asked that. I think it's really important because it brings us back to pedagogy first and the
Mhm.
tool secondary, which is always important. I just, a side note, I was a teacher at High Tech High, and people were always blown away when they found out that we actually didn't have one-to-one devices, that we really thought about technology as what students could do with their hands. So that's kind of how I enter into this. It's just, I'm kind of sharing for context, is like, the tool comes second and your teaching practice and the students come first. And so I think understanding AI literacy is really understanding what AI is, artificial intelligence, and how it operates. So understanding that it is working off patterns, understanding that it's not always correct, understanding that there's bias involved, understanding the way it operates so that you can continue to be what I would say the king or queen of your classroom. Like you still need to be in charge of your curriculum, in charge of your content. And if you don't understand the machine you're working with, it's really difficult to do that. So I'm always blown away by I've done a lot of AI e-courses and conferences, and I'm always blown away by the courses or workshops where we jump right into the tools. And it's really the workshops where we enter in and talk about how an LM works, how the actual machine itself is operating, how AI actually isn't new. It's really been around since like the 1950s. It just looks different now. Those things have really helped me, and I think elevated my practice exponentially.
And for some advice for our novice teachers and also just teachers who are already in the field, what questions should a teacher ask before deciding to use an AI tool for a lesson or a task?
Yeah, because there's no shortage of them. So I think it really comes. Oops, sorry. I think it really comes down to thinking about what it is you're trying to get, what the output is. So thinking about what it is you're trying to get out of the AI that you're using. So for example, if I am trying to create some sort of a graphic or something that I want to look really aesthetic, I'm probably not going to use Gemini. I could, but I've figured out that if I want something to look really good, I'm going to use Canva. So I think a lot of it is just operating and trying the different tools and figuring out the strengths of each one, and not feeling like you have to be married to anyone. It's more of like a dating experience.
Yeah, agreed. You do have to keep testing the waters. Um, much of your work has really been focused on project-based learning. Why do you feel like project-based learning is a useful framework for AI?
Great. Oh, thank you for the new slide. That's a great
Mhm.
question. So I think people are obviously very interested in AI right now, and they've always been interested in PBL. I think the really interesting conversation right now is how we bridge those two together. In my mind, it makes PBL sustainable for the teacher. So we could talk about policies and student use and all of that, but I'm kind of more focusing on how can we help teachers do something that we've been asking them to do, project-based learning, and allow them to get their Sundays back, or allow them to get an 8 hours of sleep back every night. So, for me, it just makes sense, and because it reduces the workload, if nothing else. And I think there are so many other benefits, but that's probably first and foremost for me is a reduction of just hours spent on designing. People are always blown away when they, either hire me to write a project for them, or they ask their teachers to develop a project. It takes me, prior to AI, it takes about 20 to 25 hours to design a project from start to finish. For reference, I can do it in about one now, with all the same, probably more content and materials. So if nothing else, it's definitely helpful in terms of getting your hours back.
And as we think about students, and you talk about like what's for students here and what's for teachers, how are we still ensuring that students are still doing the thinking? We've been hearing a lot of conversations around like AI kind of doing this mass takeover and critical thinking skills just maybe a forethought now, but how are we still continuing to put our students first and ensuring that they are still doing the work?
So one of the things that I think has been really helpful in terms of kind of the assessment loop has been this opportunity that we have to really assess and provide feedback and go through the whole loop with students on their durable skills. So, I mean, in the past, we called that like 21st century learning, the 4 C's, collaboration, communication, creativity, agency. Um, I think now with AI, we can be so much more explicit about how we communicate what that is, how we scaffold those skills, how we ask students to reflect on those skills, how we provide them feedback on those skills. And that to me is that the real metacognition comes in there when they're starting to think about themselves as a learner and thinking about themselves and how they're operating in the content. And I think, again, prior to AI, I didn't have the bandwidth to make a whole set of tools and feedback activities around skills. If I was going to do it, I was going to focus on content. And so now I feel like I don't have to choose. I can do both, and they really are equally as important. So I think that's been a big piece to me that has ensured that my students are still thinking. Well, they're thinking about the content, and then they're thinking about their thinking. And that to me is really important, is that kind of combination of the two that I think we now have the opportunity to really do that.
Yep. And I would love for to understand when you begin planning a project, where do you really start? And when I'm wondering where you start, what decisions do you have to make before using AI? And where do you bring AI into the process? Because that gets me to think, how can you tell when a teacher is using AI to support the work versus AI doing too much of the work. So we would love to hear how this really is like on the boots, like on the ground. Where do you begin?
Yeah, and how I answer this today is actually different than how I would have answered it yesterday. I was at a conference yesterday where I learned about it's called PBL 2.0, and it's a gem that was created. So basically, it's like a bot that walks you through designing a project, and it's very, very scripted. Great for a teacher who has no idea where to get started. Truly, the entry point in that sense is your standards. So you start with, hey, these are the standards I want to teach. And then it kind of walks you through how to build out the project. For me, that was a little too scripted, but I also have a lot of experience in project-based learning and I'm comfortable with AI. So for me, I start using it right away as my brainstorming partner. So it really is a thought partner from the very beginning stage. And I'll just enter in and say, I'm thinking about, well, yesterday I did this actually when I was in this session. I said, hey, I have this really great community organization that is willing to work with me. And this is a class I'm teaching. And here are some of the standards I need to cover. What do you got? Let me see. And what's really interesting is you can throw that into different tools and get different outcomes. So if you throw it into Gemini, it's going to tell you one thing. And if you throw it into chat, it's going to tell you something else. So before you know it, you have more ideas than you know what to do with. So that's kind of my I'm just hanging out and I'm thinking about something and I just want to roll an idea around. So the very, very, very beginning for me is where I start using AI when I'm designing a project.
I think the important distinction that you made here is that it's a thought partner, and you're not just using it to really take over your thinking process and how you want to deliver your deliverables and your materials at the end of the day, which is super important on how we think about tools today and what does that look like for educator preparation. But I'm wondering today, can you show us one prompt that you have used and really explain to us what you wanted AI to help you accomplish as you walk us through? And can you also kind of explain like what you kept, what you changed, and what you decided like not to use?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I probably should have mentioned this before. I push back a lot, so I'm kind of sassy. Like I don't take anything that's just produced and given to me. I push back and I say I don't like this. Let's try again. This is really important. Or I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but I really did this. One day it was like a Wednesday in October, which everyone who teaches middle school knows that you are fried by a Wednesday in October. And I said, this lesson plan we came up with yesterday is not going to work for my 27 12-year olds that have my class after lunch. It's just not going to work. So I need something more interactive, more engaging. I need them moving around the room. Try it again. And so I think, for me, it comes down to starting with, yes, I need to start with my standards, but I also need to really know my students. So I need to have those relationships. I need to know or anticipate where things are going to go sideways so that I can use artificial intelligence to help me stay ahead of that. And I'm happy to walk through what that looks like in the context of a project. If you want to do that, we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And as of course, educators use AI to understand that it may be a starting point, but ultimately it is the teacher's decision to understand whether that result is accurate, useful, and appropriate for the class. And I think that's a great example that you've used. And we would love to see, one or two examples of how this has worked for you and your students.
Yes. So I have a project that I wanted to share today that was about the pumpkin patch, which I know sounds funny. And I'll wait for our
It's okay. Summer is coming to an end. I've seen lots of fall items in stores now. I don't know. Pumpkin spice season is upon us. So it may not be too far off, actually.
according to Michael's, it's almost Thanksgiving. Who knows?
Yes, it's insane.
Great. And then if we could just click to the actual website where this project spotlight is featured. I think that's probably the easiest way for me to walk everyone through this. So I'll kind of start explaining while we're waiting for that to come up. I had an entrepreneurship class and I was teaching middle school, and I had designed in the summertime my curriculum. We were done, we were ready. And then, of course, I met my students and that wasn't going to work. So I said, okay, I went back to AI and at my kitchen table, I remember, and I just said, I need something totally different. I don't have their attention right now. And they're really squirrely and they're really excited about Halloween. I teach entrepreneurship. What can we design that would somehow integrate fall, Halloween? Who knows? So it became this back and forth brainstorm, like I mentioned before. And what we landed on was really this idea of pop up marketing or pop up sales, pop up business models, which a pumpkin patch is an example of, as is a Christmas tree, as is, Valentine candygram stand. So we use the pumpkin patch as a kind of gateway into learning about pop-up businesses. And I actually took my middle school class. I was very brave and I took them to the pumpkin patch and we interviewed the owner. And you want to talk about a really interesting lean business model? Pumpkin patches are where it's at. I mean, my kids were blown away by how much money this gentleman made in only 2 months out of the entire year. And so they were, I think, by taking them out, walking down the street to this pumpkin patch, talking to the business owner, they were able to really conceptualize that, yes, it's a pop-up business, but it's so much more than that. And it can be so much more than that. So we then came back and I had some more ideas based off of what I was noticing that the students were really into. So I went back to AI and I said, the field trip went great. They had some great data that they took away from it, and I don't want to be done. What else can we do? Because they were so into it and so excited. And so again, there was this back and forth kind of iterative brainstorm. We ended up coming up with a winter market concept. So they did a pop-up sales of a winter market. And from there, once I had the idea, then I was able to keep building. So if you scroll down a little bit on this site, you'll see I copy and pasted this exactly how it came out. So you'll see my prompt right there if you stop at the Super Grok. It says, you are a PBL expert. Develop a project plan for the month of October for my middle school entrepreneurship class. I'd like the students to learn about pop-up businesses, then visit a pumpkin patch and later Christmas tree farm to see it in action and analyze to create their own business plan for a winter market pop-up shop. So what you see below this now, if you keep scrolling down, it's ugly. But if you really look closely, then the meat's pretty good. Like it's pretty interesting what it fired back. And this structure that it's giving me right now that you're seeing, the learning goals, a project overview, it knows that that's my jam, my structure, because we've worked together so much now. So that's why you're seeing that structure. So if I were brand new doing this, I would give it some more definition. I would say, in my project plan, can you include objectives, whatever it is that you wanted to see in there. And so if you just keep scrolling down a little bit more, I then asked it to give me a timeline to see how I could pull this off in, a couple weeks. And then from there, I prompted it one last time. You'll see if you keep scrolling. Oh, yeah. And then it gives you the assessment as well. Has some recommendations for teacher tips. Here we go. Okay, so then it says, would you like a ready to use student observation checklist, business plan template, or rubric set next? I mean, it read my mind, really. But really it's because it knows the things I've been asking for, because we've been planning together so much by now. So here's an example of one of those assessment tools. I mean, this would take me hours to have made in the past. And so it spits this out. By no means would I take it as is. I would definitely go through it with a fine tooth comb and decide, do I like all of the language? Does it align with my definitions of collaboration, what I've told my students in the past? So I would kind of go through this a little bit more, see if I like it, get it the way I like it. And then I'd say there's my next prompt. Please create weekly reflection prompts that I can use for students to pause, think about themselves as a learner, provide evidence for their thinking, and create a window for me to follow up with them. Like that right there, drop the mic. I never had time to do that before AI. And so that is really, to me, where the magic happened, is because now I had all these reflection prompts, which you'll see as we keep scrolling down here. And then it just built it into the project calendar for me. So it just became embedded in what we were doing. And it built in that really important feedback loop, which we know is a best practice of formative assessment, that again, we just never really have time to do. And then I put there, lastly, my final prompt is, lastly, please create a business plan template for my students to work through. So having paper, I know people think I'm crazy, but we went back to paper. So I printed out the project plan, the business plan for them, and we just worked through each section a day. And I would bring in guest speakers to talk to them about the different parts of the business model to create their business plan. And I also just want to mention that I think, because I was spending less of my prep period or before and after school planning, I was available now to call businesses during the school day, during their work day. I was available to say, hey, come meet me for coffee during my prep period, because all of a sudden I had this time. So I was able to create these incredible relationships, like the pumpkin patch owner. And people, they love working with kids. So it's never hard. It's just getting connected to them, I think. And again, I think the work that I was doing with AI freed me up so that I could make those community connections. And so I was able to bring them into the process as well. So this once I would get it the way I'd want it, then I would nail it down into, a Google Doc or a PDF. But by no means would I take it as is and run, because I would really need to think about where are the gaps in my students' learning? Where are they going to need additional support? It really still needs to be customized to my students. and also to what I feel is important for them to learn too. So still definitely the teacher is in command of the entire process.
I think you brought up a great point that, of course, we know that future and current teachers will work with students who have different skills, needs, and level of support. And I'm wondering, as we think about educator prep programs and how do we like integrate that fidelity into that, is there a role that mentor teachers, coaches, or even journey workers could play into that and to support in that coaching?
Yeah, I took this really great course through AI for education, and they have a cute name for it. I forget what it's called, but basically it's when the master teacher, head teacher does like a think aloud, basically with AI. So it goes through the professor say would go through the process of actually doing the prompt in front of the class and showing kind of what I just did, but a much more dynamic, like in real time, what the responses would be. And I love this because it gets that metacognition piece, but also I think part of what I know a lot of teachers are afraid of with AI is we say, yeah, you just put in a prompt and see what happens, and then it's the like gray what happens that I think people sometimes feel really uncomfortable in that space. So allowing students to get inside your brain and see the way you're prompting it, I think is probably the most important thing a mentor can do, or parent. I have two teenage kids, so I do it with them all the time. I say, hey, what did you just prompt it with? Which the way teens prompt and the way I prompt is very different. It's kind of funny, but um, I sit down next to him and I say, no, 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 give it back. Tell it you don't like that. So you have to show people, I think, in real time. To me, that's really the only way that I truly understood it was going through this course where the teacher did that think aloud with us. Um, so that would probably be my number one recommendation is making the time for that. And I think it's probably scary because you don't really know what you're going to get in front of a whole class of students. And so, I think that's probably could also be why maybe more teachers aren't doing that or professors.
Sense. What should candidates understand about student information and privacy when using AI tools?
Yeah, all privacy. Yeah, you don't want to put anything in there that is personal information by any means. So I would narrow it down, say to like the city I was in, but not the school. Or I would narrow it down to I would never put in names of my students. I would say I have one student that's particularly struggling with how to work in the group. What would you suggest for supporting them the next group activity we have, rather than putting the exact name or specific information?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very important. What should traditional preparation programs, residencies, teacher apprenticeship programs, is there something that you think that they should teach now that they may not have taught 2 years ago? Because you referenced earlier, you're like, hey, my answer from yesterday might change from my answer today. And as we think about what was available, 2 years ago versus now, is there anything that you would like, hey, this needs to be taught? This is something that's exponential to the field currently, and more people should know about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge with a lot of things in higher ed is just kind of differentiating theory from practice. And so when we talk about project based learning, a student might get a lot of exposure to the actual, foundation of project based learning and how to design a project, and that's all beautiful and important. But then when you get in the classroom, that pretty easily becomes a dumpster fire. And so I think really talking about constraints and the real constraints that you're up against in the classroom, whether it be the competing needs of students, time, additional meetings outside of class where you don't have time to prep. I think somehow simulating those constraints as you're designing, to me, would feel much more realistic and would prepare teachers a lot more for what really happens when you get into the classroom.
Yes, and continuing your point on higher ed, there's oftentimes where we hear educator prep faculty members may know that they need to address the AI situation, but often they don't feel really confident using it themselves. What advice would you give to someone or to the field who understands the importance of this work, but really don't know where to begin?
Um, so a few things. I have like a very technical answer, but then I have like a little bit more playful but very sincere answer, which is I would say the most important thing you can do if you're not comfortable with AI is just start using it in your personal life. So, my family and I, we just went on a trip to Portugal, and I planned the entire trip with the help of AI. But then along the way, we all figured out that we needed more help, whether it be translating or understanding certain contexts of things. So my family ended up really heavily relying on AI for our entire trip. So much so that when I'd sit down at a restaurant, I couldn't read my wine options and I knew what kind of wine I liked. So I would tell AI, here's what I normally like. Here's what's on the menu. What can you suggest and why? And then it was like I got to learn about the regions and the wine. So it turned out to be this learning experience for me. But it was again getting into that back and forth relationship of inputting and reading and then giving it something else. And I think that that's how you get comfortable with it. So that would be my very personal kind of sincere answer to that. My very technical response would say if you needed to start somewhere and you were feeling uncomfortable, I think Gemini is very user friendly. And I think it can start as simple as giving it an idea that you want to flush out. So maybe what a conversation you would have with the colleague that for whatever reason you haven't had yet, I would say give it a go. Like just see where it takes you and kind of start this back and forth. That to me is really where you need to first get comfortable is how to go back and forth with and then it's refining the prompts, which is pretty important. But I think if someone's just looking to get started, I wouldn't talk too much about prompt creating.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we think about the spirit of like partnership, um, how can educator prep programs and also school districts really work together so future teachers can really receive clearer and more consistent guidance, would you say?
um I think that relationship between the stakeholders that you just mentioned is is so imperative, and it doesn't really cross over like it probably needs to. So having, for me at least, I don't, it's structured a little bit differently now, but for me, I took all of my courses for my teacher's ed program, and then I went and did my classroom teaching, my practicum hours, and then I had my own classroom. Like it was like you jumped so quickly between those hoops. And I think if there was a way for those things to all happen simultaneously, that would have led to a much more holistic preparation. I still laugh about my first year teaching. I mean, I was 22 and I had no idea what I was doing. But I think, if I had been able to get my toe wet a little bit and had a chance to kind of do all of these things and see how they're all related, I think that would have prepared me a lot more than approaching it like I was kind of coming in and staying in a tunnel.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And one of the things that made my like ears ring is that you mentioned that there were several steps that you were taking along the way. So what would you say ongoing coordination should look like beyond just a one-time training or just a like mention of tools?
In terms of like teacher ed programs or in terms of,
Yes.
okay. Um, yeah, I mean, I sat in on this great workshop last year actually at UNC Charlotte, where an English teacher had set up the entire year in Notebook LM. And I thought that was a really lovely way to live the model with students and show them, hey, here's a way to use the tool and have it just become part of what you need to do already, which is teach and have a syllabus and all and resources. And it kind of created like this space where teachers were able to feel familiar with it as a user. So they in turn felt more comfortable with it when they were leading a class to use it with their students.
Thank you. And as we think about really this continued partnership and ongoing structure, what are some key items that you think like should programs really be discussing with districts and school partners now?
Yeah, it's tricky because it's changing so fast. Um, and as much as I would say, familiarity with tools like that's almost irrelevant too, because every district uses a different tool. So it's like you kind of have to just have it comes back to actually what we talked about in the very beginning of really understanding conceptually how the tools work so that you're agile within using different tools in different settings. I think that's really important is understanding how artificial intelligence operates so that you can move in and out of different tools once you're kind of on the ground and running. Um, and I think continuing to have people in classrooms, I think is really important. So having teachers that are preparing to become teachers, visiting different types of classrooms, I think there's so much you can learn from different styles of teaching and different ages. I know for me, I started out as a secondary teacher and I never visited an elementary school classroom, and shame on my program because I should have. Um, I think it's really important to see how students build up to when they get to you so that you can understand what goes into that work. So I think just more time in classrooms with obviously intentional placement of teachers in those settings, but just more time to see it.
Thank you. I have one final question. If participants were to take away one action from today's webinar, what would you recommend that they do first outside of just using a tool?
I would say it's important to think about your why. So I know that that's an overstated use of that term. What's your why? Why are you doing what you're doing? But I think it's really important to pause, and this is a great time of year to do that too, is to pause and think about what am I trying to get out of whatever it is I'm doing? What am I trying to get out of my students? Why do I feel it's important for them to have these skills? What do I want them to remember long term? Like really getting to your why and then thinking about the tools as ways that can help you to your why, but definitely not thinking about AI as your why going into the year, really keeping yourself grounded in your teaching practice and your students.
Thank you for that. We've heard from many ed prep programs, that they know AI is here to stay, but we're still hearing the question of like, where do we begin? And they're not necessarily asking for a list of tools. They're asking for guidance and support on really how to prep future educators to think carefully, to make sound instructional decisions, and to continue to use AI without giving up their professional judgment that teaching requires. And so, something that we've done at Pathways is we've been really working with partners to consider what AI literacy should look like in teacher prep. And for us, AI literacy is not just the ability to operate a tool, it's the ability to decide when AI can help, when it cannot, as you mentioned, and also when the teacher must lead. It also includes checking the accuracy of AI generated information, protecting student information, and also understanding the limits of the technology. This is something I think that we have just really like elevated the importance of during the classroom, especially for classroom-based training, where whether candidates are prepping for a traditional program, a teacher residency, a registered teacher apprenticeship, that they need really the opportunities, as you mentioned, to use AI in real teaching situations, but with guidance from experienced educators. And I think something that you've mentioned earlier, Jennifer, was that mentor teachers, coaches can really help candidates evaluate AI generated materials, improve their prompts, identify any errors, and also reflect on whether the technology improved the lesson or if it's something that is not needed at all. And I think those experiences is something is offers that clear guidance so that candidates can really understand that they're not receiving conflicting messaging. I also appreciate your point, Jennifer, about it does really start with the pedagogy of project-based learning. And you've used project-based learning as an example. And I think that the broader lesson here is that the instructional approach must come first. So although while AI may assist with lesson planning, materials, feedback, and some of the reflection pieces, it does not determine what students learn or replace teaching a teacher's understanding of the class. I think what we've named here today is that as AI continues to change, ed prep programs really have the opportunity to build off these skills into coursework, classroom experiences, continued coaching, and also candidate assessment. Um, and I would love to hear a little bit more, Jennifer, as like programs also don't need to chase every new tool. I think as we continue to understand that clear expectations are needed, they can continue to guide future teachers as the technology changes. And I would love to hear from you about like some of that AI and like clinical practice and what does that mean as teachers really prepare for the classrooms where AI is present among programs, school districts, workforce partners. How do we continue to work together and like why does it start there?
I mean, I think it really starts with being a lifelong learner. So, as a teacher, it's so important to model that you yourself are always learning and you're open to new information and new ways of doing things. I think people often underestimate that, and it's really important. So I spend so much of my day reading, listening, watching, learning still every day. And I think that's going to continue to be really, really important as we move forward with technology just happening so quickly. I think teachers, professors will need to really model what that looks like to continue to learn and evolve and be willing to try things that maybe feel uncomfortable or not as structured or planned as you're used to, so that the students in your class can see firsthand how to handle that when you have your own classroom. So I think that's really important for teachers and professors to model that lifelong learning.
Yeah. Jennifer, thank you for sharing your experience and really giving us some practical examples to consider. In our time, we will now turn to questions from the audience. If you have not submitted a question, please feel free to add it to the Q&A. And we do have a question from Julie. Julie is wondering about challenges what, sorry. I'm wondering about challenges you had when AI was your partner in creating rubrics, projects, and different things. Specifically, I find challenges with my familiarity with the products when AI helps. I haven't spent as much time with the product as I did when I created it alone. Have you encountered this or have you worked to overcome this challenge?
I have definitely encountered that. This happened to me a few weeks ago. I had created an agenda for a workshop I was going to do, and I asked AI, I think I actually had used Notebook LM, asked it to produce a slide deck for me. And I didn't review this. I mean, this was like, talk about a teachable moment. I didn't review the slide deck because I was in a hurry and I got up to do the presentation, looked behind me, and I was like, I'm actually not sure what that says. So, yes, that happens. And I think it happens on a daily basis all throughout the day, really. And I think that just continues to remind us how important it is that we are not on autopilot here by any means. We are very much in control and have to keep a very confined sense of our curriculum and our content as we ask for that kind of co-planning process. Yeah, it happens. It happens to me on a daily basis. If I get, I don't want to say lazy, but if I get, sometimes I'll just, it's so easy to create content, and sometimes I'll just kind of get going on a roll. But if you don't really stop and spend some time with it and really get that back and forth going, that's a risk you run.
Thank you. We have another question. Molly has two questions, and I'll start off with the first one. How do you balance, how do you balance help to prepare teachers so that they can be the expert and still quality control for AI while allowing teacher candidates to explore AI?
It's a good question. That's a tricky balance. And I will also name that I have my own bias in how I answer that question because I am an expert in project based learning. So I feel confident being able to push back and kind of have that iterative relationship. Whereas I fully recognize that a brand new teacher might not have that kind of confidence or command yet. of the curriculum. And so I think, again, it's so simple, but I think it's so important is, again, modeling that prompting back and forth process. And I actually found the resource. It is called a Think Aloud, by AI for Education. And I just think it's an incredible protocol to follow to really walk people through how to hold that balance, how to do just that.
Okay. And the next question is, how are you thinking about balancing AI use on the negative impact that it has on the environment, especially on communities of color, and communities where our students might live?
Yeah, there is not actually a shortage of of cons to the pros. That's for sure. And I think for me, I have I'll own this. I have approached it from a pretty narrow perspective of just thinking about how I can use it. I haven't even really crossed that into what it looks like for my students to use it successfully because I struggled so much with it and I needed to learn how to do it on my own first. So I'm still really learning, and I'm still learning. I think we're all probably still learning what the consequences are, to where we're at right now. And so I think for me, it's just I appreciate that question. It's being continuously thinking about that and being reminded that I need to keep that at the forefront of my learning as
Yes.
well.
Great, thank you. Melissa asks, I'm curious whether your school district has adopted a specific set of curricular materials. So, for instance, high quality instructional materials that teachers have been asked to use. If so, do you load these into your AI tools so that they can produce aligned materials? If not, is this something that you would recommend teachers would do if their districts do have this type of curricular policy?
Yes. So I think what I love the most about Notebook LM, if you're not familiar with it, is that you can load in all the things you just mentioned. So I was in a situation where I didn't have a curriculum because I taught an elective course this last year. And so for me, I did have my syllabus and I did have books that I thought were important for my students to get some of the content from. I had certain activities that I really liked. So I ended up kind of building all of that in the notebook to then pull from. But I think if you're working in a school or a district where they're telling you that you need to use these certain resources, then yes, load it in because the more information that you can give the AI, the better it can align the outcomes to what you're asking it to do. There's no such thing as giving it too much information, I've learned.
Thank you for sharing. Great. And it looks like that's all of our questions to date, which is very helpful. So thank you, Jennifer, for answering all of those questions. And also thank you for joining us today and also for sharing your classroom experience. And thank you for partnering with us here on today's conversation. I really do hope that everyone leaves with a clear understanding that prepping teachers for AI is just really not mainly about mastering individual tools. It really is about helping teachers make informed decisions, keep an instruction at the center, and giving future educators the opportunity to practice with guidance from experienced teachers. We will follow up with the webinar recording and related resources. We also do invite you to stay connected with the Pathways Alliance as we continue working with partners on AI literacy and educator prep, and also some classroom-based training. And before I wish all of our farewells, Jennifer, is there any last points that you would like to make or share, or any last thoughts that, as we're having this conversation, that came to mind?
Uh, I just think, again, as this time of year, as we head into the school year, it can be a very overwhelming time for teachers and students alike. So I think if you're feeling overwhelmed by this, start small. Just start, like I mentioned before, with something really basic in your home life. If you're into gardening, I use it for gardening all the time. Whatever it is that you're into, just kind of get comfortable with that back and forth friendship, almost a partnership, so that you can then kind of transfer that to other contexts as you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again. Jennifer, if you'd like to share your contact information, if folks have more questions post this webinar, Jennifer is on LinkedIn. We'll also be tagging her in some of our future posts. If you'd like to add her on LinkedIn, please feel free to do so. We look forward to, of course, chatting with you, Jennifer, in the future. And have a rest of your wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you for joining us.